Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. It's just gone 1 o'clock, so I'm going to give everybody a chance to join. Do feel free to drop into the Q&A box and say hi. We have disabled the chat feature as we've discovered it can cause problems for some people using screen readers. So I can see more and more people are just coming in, so I'll give them a few more minutes to arrive. Great. Okay, so we're going to make a start now. So hi everyone and welcome to our webinar, How Accessibility Improves SEO, where AbilityNet's Head of Marketing and Portfolio, Mark Walker, will be having a panel discussion with guests from Skyscanner and AXA. I'm Emma Wheeler, Marketing Manager here at AbilityNet, and I'll be running you through today's session. So a few bits of housekeeping. We have live captions today provided by MyClearText. You can turn on the captions using the CC option on the control panel. Additional captions are available via streamtext.net/player?event equals AbilityNet. Slides are also available at slideshare.net/AbilityNet and on our website abilitynet.org.uk/SEO webinar. If you have any technical issues and you need to leave early, don't worry, you'll receive an email in a couple of days' time with a recording, transcript and slides. And depending on how you join the webinar, you'll find a Q&A window. If you want to ask the panelists any questions, do drop those into the Q&A area for them to address. They will do so near the end of today's session, or any that we don't have time to will be answered online in a few days at abilitynet.org.uk/SEO webinar. Also, please do feel free to leave feedback in the post-webinar survey. So that's all from me now, over to Mark.
Hi everyone, welcome, and thanks Emma, and thanks for setting this up. I think it's going to be a great session. I think SEO and accessibility both are broadly equivalent to witchcraft, people who are not involved directly in it. So today we're going to try and draw the veil back a little bit on those two subjects and find out a little bit more about how they connect and why they're related to each other. And in particular, I think sort of hear from people with both sets of expertise about how we can make the most of making content more accessible, but equally make it more successful in terms of SEO. So we've got a great panel here. Kim, Griff, Jack and Nathan, and we're going to go in through a couple of sessions first, and then we're going to have some panel discussions. We're going to hear from AXA first, and then we're going to hear from Skyscanner. And I think what we're trying to do is just get to the root of what are the possible connections between SEO and accessibility. Why would they be discussed together? And then move into top tips and some suggestions from either side of that conversation about how they join up in terms of best practice. Emma mentioned the Q&A. Please do ask as many questions as you like. We can all see the questions and answers when you're putting them in there. And even if they don't get answered in today's session, we always do an FAQ afterwards. This is a juicy topic. We're not going to get through everything that we've even planned, I think, because there's lots of stuff to discuss. So we want to hear what your questions are. We want to try and answer them. And if we can't answer them today, we'll do our best to follow that up in an FAQ. So without further ado, we're going to go over to Jack and Nathan and talk a little bit about how AXA approaches this question of the crossover between accessibility and SEO. Hi guys, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I just want to start it today by highlighting some of the overlap we see between SEO and accessibility. While our SEO work at AXA typically kind of focuses on ensuring our website is accessible for search engines, a lot of the areas we focus on also have an impact on the accessibility of the site for our users. And so the first overlap we've got here is title tags. We know from extensive studies there is correlation between the use of keywords in the title tag and Google rankings. They're not visible on the page itself, but are located in the code. And they're the first thing a screen reader user hears when loading a page. We want to be able to describe what the page is about for our accessible users in the title tag, and this usually correlates with our target keywords for SEO. So here we can see the title tag for our small business health insurance page being displayed in the Google search results, which tells our users the page is all about small business health insurance. So that's title tags. And the next overlap we see is heading tags on the next slide. So So screen readers also use headings to navigate quickly through content on a page. So users can jump from one heading to the next fairly easily. Heading tags are used to separate headings and subheadings on a web page, with H1 being the main heading. And Googlebot also crawls them to see what different sections of the page are about. So we usually just have one H1 on a page, and then the rest should flow down in kind of a logical manner using H2s, H3s, H4s, which makes it easier for a screen reader to decipher. So that's heading tags. And the next overlap we want to look at next is links. So Google sees external links known as backlinks from other websites as votes of confidence for you from when you get them from other websites. So we can see from the diagram with PageRank and the first Google algorithm, if you were the yellow site in this image, you would likely rank the highest as you'd have the most backlinks and also the most authoritative backlinks from other websites, for example, those in the blue and the red. So it's really important to have external backlinks from other websites, but it's also important to have internal links well optimized for SEO and how you interlink all your pages within your site back to each other's pages. So it's external links and internal links are really important. But when it comes to accessibility, the text of the link itself, known as the anchor text, is really important, as this is what is seen by our screen readers. We avoid using anchor text like click here, as this is unhelpful to both our accessibility users and for our SEO. So instead we include keywords telling the user what the page linked to is about. And in turn, this helps our SEO as Google gives more weight to ranking what is in the anchor text of the link itself. And the next one we want to look at is alt text of images. So yeah, finally we've got alt text. So if there's no alt text, then the screen reader will not know and not be able to say what the image is showing. So it's important to name the image appropriately, also describing what the image is showing, using hyphens to separate words. And so that's finally our last overlap was alt text. But I just want to highlight a few other areas in the next slide where we also see SEO and accessibility overlapping. So at AXA, we always try and provide transcripts and captions for all our video on the site. And it's important to have kind of sitemaps, XML and HTML sitemaps, allowing multiple ways of finding content on the site. We always try to use text instead of images where possible. We always try and ensure our URLs are readable by humans and are presented in a logical format. We also try and present a clear and consistent navigation and page structure for our users. And then finally, we also define abbreviations and acronyms. So we spell them out so it's easier for our screen readers and also for our SEO. So in summary, we've got good accessibility and good search engine optimization is great combination for our website owners and end users. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of tools that we use finally, just to show how we measure our accessibility in the next couple of slides. And the first one we use is a tool called Wave, where you can enter any web page and it will go through and check the whole web page for any accessibility errors, which we're then able to address as it shows us in the box on the right hand side what errors there are and what we need to do. And then the second one is Google Lighthouse. On the next slide, so like Wave, you can simply enter any web page you want to check, and then the whole process is automated, and it'll give you an accessibility score out of 100, and then give solutions on how to fix the issue. So they're the two tools we use to go over our web pages and try and ensure we've got the best accessibility scores possible. Okay, that's all my slides. I just want to hand over now to my colleagues from Skyscanner.
Hi guys. Cool. Yeah, hey, that was great. So now that you've heard from Jack and Nathan on an overview of some of those synergies between SEO and accessibility best practice, Griff and I are going to go through how we've been working towards implementing accessibility on some of our SEO pages, some ideas we have for the future, and how we can potentially validate the impact that accessibility has on SEO. First of all, a bit about us. If we just go to the next slide. So I'm the senior content writer and I work across all of our transactional SEO landing pages. So it's my job to interpret all of the SEO team's strategy, insights, research, and work with designers to build out content for landing pages. And of course, write all of the SEO optimized copy. Griff?
Yeah, so I'm a SEO software engineer. So I work on the back end of basically data for SEO. But I'm also a huge accessibility advocate as being an accessibility user myself. So I'm very heavily involved with company culture and like accessibility, running various events and stuff like that. So they kind of merge into one thing for me, really. So.
Yeah, we're both members of the Accessibility Champions Network. If we just hop over to the next slide. We're probably going to talk a little bit more about the Accessibility Champions Network at Skyscanner a little bit later on in the Q&A, just in the interests of time right now. But if the next slide, it just, it's a big, it's basically a huge sort of cross-discipline army of advocates for accessibility that our fantastic accessibility lead set up. And it's just the main idea of it is that we can get accessibility really embedded within Skyscanner's internal culture. We're still obviously working towards making sure that accessibility is embedded in every area of our external facing product, but we're getting there. But yeah, we'll talk more about that probably in a little while. If we just go to the next slide. So some of the ways that we try and make our landing pages more accessible, some of the workflows and processes. First of all, in the design process, I will work with designers to ensure that we're annotating our designs in the clearest way possible. So you can see on the right, there's some examples of how we do this in our design tool, Figma. We use labels that we can get out of Figma's public library. And we have different ones to call out alt tags, empty alt tags, what should be a H1, a H2, and a H3. And this again obviously highlights how like the fundamental accessibility considerations we need to highlight for engineers are also SEO best practice. So you can really sort of like capture all of your accessibility needs and SEO ones in that same Figma file, which is really handy to remember. You can also see in the red labels in the bottom right hand example is how we highlight focus order, so that screen readers are able to call out the all of the information and things like tables in the right order. We try and go one step further than this as well. We use the same components across multiple landing pages and parts of the product. So what I've started to do is bring in some brilliant some engineers from around the business who are, really good accessibility experts. We all get together in a room and we actually just sort of flesh out the exact documentation and notes on how each component should be built, so that when it's time to hand over designs to engineers to build, everything's there and ready for them to work on and nothing's missing. We are trying to streamline this more at the moment, and we're piloting and testing a Figma plugin called Stark. We don't have any, we've just got a couple of product designers testing that out at the moment, but we'll be able to share what we think of it once it's a little bit more, well, hopefully more implemented within our processes. In terms of the copywriting process, I always ensure all of the accessibility labels, ARIA tags, etc., that we do need are submitted at exactly the same time in the same documentation as that my copy is. And this way it can never be an afterthought and it can't be, missed by any of the engineers sending that off to translation or for implementation. And then anyone who's in a medium to large size business, I'm sure that you're all really familiar with your sort of sign-off processes. It's very normal to have the usual sort of legal sign-off for any of the work you do, a peer review perhaps from a senior writer, or, in this case, obviously, I always get sign-off from an SEO manager to make sure the text is all optimized as best as possible for SEO. I've just ensured basically that we've added accessibility sign-off from an accessibility lead as an official stream of sign-off for all things copywriting too, so that we know we're not missing anything.
Yeah, we kind of do the same with like engineering as well. So anything that goes through to production is peer review before that, and we embed the peer review of accessibility before it actually goes out to production. So we can deal with problems before they become a problem rather than trying to fix them afterwards, which can take 10 times longer.
Cool. I think we can jump on to the next slide. So by now, obviously, hopefully you're all a little bit more familiar with those synergies between SEO and accessibility. But we do know that accessibility isn't an actual official ranking factor that Google takes into consideration yet. And so I guess the big question is, how do we actually validate that accessibility can positively impact SEO? And Mark and I had a really interesting discussion around some of the ways that we could try this earlier this year. And I'm really keen to share some of them with you guys, just to call out, just to be completely transparent. We haven't had a chance to try any of these yet, but we want to share anyway. And maybe that way someone can beat us to it, try out their own testing, and then share with the wider community to see what if there are any interesting results. So a couple of the ways, if we just go to the next slide. The first thing we thought of is, well, basically at Skyscanner, we're lucky enough to work with a really fantastic piece of software called Search Pilot. I'm not sure how many people on the call might have heard of this, but it allows us to actually A/B test changes to content on live landing pages, and then over a period of 2 or 3 months, monitor the impact that that content might have had on organic traffic to see if we can see a lift in organic sessions, or at the very least, do no harm, so we can roll out that content. So when you think about how we can use that to see how accessibility improvements might impact organic traffic, you could first of all just try with some basics. If you find a page that's sort of doing okay for organic traffic, and it could do with its H titles made clearer, text made more readable and accessible, alt text being optimized, things like that, you would be able to roll it out as an experiment and see whether or not that had a lift. We saw a lift in organic sessions on that variant. Another thing you could do that you could try is, if you have any content that ranks quite well or is at least indexed that features a video or a podcast, you might want to try adding a transcript below for users who may have a hearing impairment, if you haven't got that already. Obviously, this is the correct thing to do for accessibility, but we also know that extra word count and relevant keywords on a page could really give it a boost in the SERPs. So you could test that as well. And finally, we know that marking up things like lists and tables of information can really help us if we're on the first page of Google, because it can improve our appearance within the SERPs by getting that snippet of information within our appearance. But if you were to build that list or table in a properly accessible way and then test that, you could see whether or not that actually impacted organic sessions as well. The second thing we thought about was testing copy to see if we could make it more readable. So obviously, when you consider that people with dyslexia, a short attention span, or even those people who aren't native English speakers, they might really struggle to understand some of the copy on the website if it's been written in a complex way. The average reading age that we should all be working towards as copywriters is around 9. And we know that readable content and understandable content is something that Google also takes into account. Now, because of this, there's loads of great tools out there that SEOs are probably really familiar with, like SEMrush's Writing Assistant, or even just the Yoast plugin that you can get for WordPress, which gives you a readability score. So there's nothing to stop you finding some legacy content on one of your landing pages that could be rewritten in a more readable way, and have a go at running it through one of those tools to see if you can really simplify it, get it live, and see whether or not your accessibility score will increase, but see whether or not you get any extra organic sessions from that just by monitoring metrics. Cool. I think that's that kind of wraps up our part of this session.
Just, excuse me, I was coughing, that's why I disappeared. So I love the fact you started at the back there, started at the end. I worked backwards from what you said, Kim, about how can you prove it. There's actually a question that's come in a bit in here, I think. But just to catch up a little bit on what we saw there, there's lots and lots of stuff coming at us. The first question that was asked is, can we get the slides after? The answer is yes. The other thing is, I think that the reason we write up notes and FAQs afterwards is because there's lots of detail in there. When we got together and started talking about it, we can see the connections. We tried to lay them out there for you. We will look at some of the questions in here, but just to summarize a few of the things you heard at the beginning: titles and headings and links, something about workflows. Kim started introducing, showing you some of the tools about how people are working collaboratively and embedding accessibility into their workflows. And then at the end, they're just thinking about how you can prove it and whether you can learn from the data what's working, what's not working on both sides. I think so. That's a very, very quick run through some juicy topics there, I think. And the reason we're switching to Q&A mode is I think it's been interesting to see what questions you have, but we're also just so that we can pick out themes we think are important in terms of how this is implemented, because it's not just about that. This is the science, if you like. You know, if you get your headings in this order, then a screen reader can do it, and Google likes it as well. That's the sort of theory. But how do you make that happen on your pages? How, you know, what's the practical reality when you're trying to work across this divide? So I'm just going to just ask a question firstly about workflows, and maybe back to you, Kim. Firstly, you talked about some of those tools. Can you just tell us a little bit about who's involved in that process in terms of your teams? Do you have an accessibility specialist, for example, when you say that sign off? Do you then have some parallel process? Because that's quite messy, I guess, on a day-to-day basis. There's lots of different stakeholders and people in the process. How does that play out for you as a workflow thing?
Yeah, in honesty, we don't actually have anything in terms of a proper workflow other than just our usual sort of like Jira or ClickUp workflow board. What we do is, I mean, first of all, you asked about which kind of engineers and who is involved. So Griff is one of the engineers who usually gets involved to spec out those components. And Griff is assigned to what we call the Winning SEO project. So we are always on this work stream together. So he helps out. And then we have Heather Hepburn, our fantastic accessibility lead. Some people who may have joined an AbilityNet webinar in the past might have heard from Heather. She usually is involved, and then we will have maybe potentially one or two other engineers who might have some expertise in a specific type of design, who jump on in a lot of time to just note down and discuss anything that's needed. So it can be quite sort of dynamic and ad hoc, if I'm honest. And then once that is all captured, we kind of hand over those finalized Figma files to engineers in a formal handover process. And those annotations, and it's all clearly signposted and documented to those guys, towards those guys. We do have a lot of engineering teams over in like Shenzhen offices, so we do have to make sure that everything is very clearly signposted and documented. As often, you know, we only have limited hours during the day to even, you know, touch base with each other in the morning. So yeah, I think that's everything. Griff, I'm not sure if you've got anything to add around processes and workflows.
Yeah, like obviously you can have the best laid plans of mice and men, and then you get to the end of it and you don't always fully complete everything. So we do have the extra step of the process to kind of be fully iterative, that you're always going to find accessibility problems when you get to the end. So we have user testing, and we also have, like, you know, engineers like myself are very good on like testing products. We'll test the product really before it goes out to market, and just make sure it's accessible. And then when we do identify these problems, they're fed back to our teams, because our engineering teams are self-managing, and then we'll act in consultation with our content writers and our designers, and Heather herself, who I believe is listening, who will, you know, help us kind of deal with these problems as they come. So it's kind of a very fluid and dynamic process rather than being a rigid linear process, which is really good. So yeah.
Nathan or Jack, I'm not sure where to start, but AXA, I don't actually know in terms of scale how big the teams are at AXA that you're working with. You're working across teams, I know, but that what we've heard there from Griffin and Kim is like an organic process as well. It's not just, oh, we imposed this on day one and it's worked ever since. I'm guessing that your workflows and your solutions to sort of crossing this divide are equally sort of fluid and flexible. Jack, is that something you can talk to a bit?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So I didn't introduce myself before, but yeah, I'm Jack Smale. I'm the website manager for AXA.co.uk, SwiftRecover.com, and motorinsurance.co.uk, which are kind of the AXA retail-based products. But obviously AXA is, you know, has got multiple sites across the UK. So within my wider team, I sit within what's called the Digital Centre of Excellence. So we've basically got a sister team which looks after basically digital quality management. And within that, there is a guy called Mark Roster, who's the digital quality manager. And then we've got a guy called Carl Elliott, who is our digital accessibility consultant. And effectively what they do is they spend a lot of their time carrying out VPAT testing. So these are voluntary product accessibility, but it's a template basically that they go through for all new user journeys before they're rolled out now. And this is kind of something that they've developed and is going to be taken forward for anything new that's developed in the future. And so Carl is actually, he's visually impaired himself. And so when he tests the journeys, he uses a range of screen readers. So he uses JAWS, NVDA, and also VoiceOver for Mac. And what he will do is highlight any issues he encounters. And then Mark goes away, effectively puts together a spreadsheet, and then he'll hand that over to the digital product owner. And it's effectively left to them to determine how they prioritize resolving these. But where there's a particularly complex issue, effectively he will make sure there's a screen recording which shows what Carl is seeing when he's going through the screen reader. And that really just gives the developers the insight they need, and gives them a bit more information about how they might go about resolving this. And then obviously it ends up on a stack, and they either fix it there and then, or they build it into a future release.
Cool.
And then I guess on a more personal level, that's more kind of on the side where people are actually getting quotes for our insurance products. We also have our main brochureware websites. So whenever I'm creating a new component, or I'm building a page that uses an element of custom code, I find that using just VoiceOver for iOS is the most convenient way of checking how a page appears to a screen reader. I guess the best device you've got is the one that's available to you. So I know there's an equivalent for Android as well.
Cool. So Nathan, I don't know, Jack's talking now about the engineering. Where does SEO come into that mix? Because obviously the content and the architecture and the code and all those bits mixed together at a certain point. To what extent are the SEO team sort of aware of accessibility? Do you train them? Do you provide support so that they're thinking about through the heading structure stuff, some of the sort of most simple content, and also some of the keyword stuff that Kim's alluding to?
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, my job as SEO manager would be to train up the content team who are writing the content. So I give them kind of training sessions, just going over the best practice SEO techniques. So things like the titles, headings, and the keyword densities, and the kind of keywords we want to get in our copy. So that'd be where I come in to train them up, and they'd go in and write the content. Then it would come back to me, and I'll just have a final check over and make sure everything's aligned and all the accessibility is as optimized as possible before we go to publish. So it's kind of that's the way it works for our team.
Like a check-in process as part of the workflow. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
And I'm guessing that part of the challenge there is you're trying to have people get it right first time, rather than finding loads like this is sort of eternal accessibility problem. On one of the slides was talking about how much better it is to get it right at the beginning rather than try and fix it later. And I'm guessing that challenge is true in SEO as well. And is there anything in particular that you've seen work for the SEO people that you're connecting with? What do they latch on to first? Is the heading structure a nice simple one for them to get their head around? Are there other lessons and tips that you offer that really sort of land for them?
So yeah, it's kind of training them and just getting into their head what they need to include and how they need to format the copy and the titles as well. Just thinking about what they want to put in the titles and the headings. So it's just really the training and just trying to. It is lots of back and forth, as you say. So it'll come back to me, and then I'll kind of edit it and it'll go back for approval. So there's lots of approvals and reapprovals before we get to a final draft. So it is quite a cumbersome process, but we do actually get there in the end, and we're usually very pleased with the overall result. But it does take time, and like you said, lots of back and forth.
And how recent is this accessibility consideration and SEO combo? Is this relatively new for you guys, or is this something that you've been sort of building over time? Nathan, Jack.
Yeah, I can kind of jump in. I'd say the whole we've had people in the business who've been really interested in accessibility for many years, but I'd say it's really come to the fore in probably the last 2.5 years. And I think that's probably as a result of the fact that the Google Lighthouse reporting now does include accessibility within it. So when you're looking at your Lighthouse scores, you know, there is accessibility in parallel to SEO, and you know, you can kind of see over time if you're optimizing for one, you kind of see an almost direct correlation on the other. It's not perfect, but you know, the better you get, the better it is all round.
Yeah, that wins the argument hands down, presumably before you even get into whether or not using a screen reader. Oh look, my score's gone up. Good. That's the
Yeah,
best.
exactly. That sort of instant gratification is always good.
Yeah. And what about conflicts between SEO and accessibility? I'm guessing there are certain points in time when, despite your best efforts on either side of that coin, you're seeing somebody wanting to go one direction, and you know that that's going to sort of negatively affect the other area. How common is that, and what sort of issues does it raise? I don't know whether anybody's got a particular thing to add to that one.
Yeah, I'll jump in with that one. Like, you're always going to have conflicts with like providing the like accessible content, because it's seen as like a cost. Is there something that gets in the way of development or product or something like that, which is an unfortunate thing that happens in this modern world, but it's true and it does. But I think the easiest way to deal with that conflict for me is looking at it as it's not a cost, it's a profit. Because most people look at it as a legal issue or a moral issue. The FCA says that I need to do this. The Equalities Act 2010 says I need to do this. And we look at it as a model of like, we've got to adapt to make it better for accessible people. But people with accessibility problems are consumers within themselves. And we've got to cater to those consumers and give them the product they need. And that includes SEO. Like, SEO is part of that and what we can give people. So by allowing them to be consumers and thinking, hey, this is a profit thing, and selling it in that kind of thing, like, oh, we want to attract these consumers, the purple pound, you sell it much better that way. And people can acknowledge that a much better. To actually make the difference. And then the legal stuff and the side thing, that becomes a side thing rather than being the emphasis. So for me, if you build a culture around like that kind of element and like being they are a consumer and they're not just someone that you're trying to help, it really helps build that momentum, I think. So
Yeah, just to add to Griff's point, I think that if you sort of really start to understand as people who with accessibility needs as genuine consumers with money to spend, and you pitch it to sort of senior stakeholders, product managers, that way they really will start to listen, because there's like, you know, a 5 or a 10% increase on your profit margin that you could potentially achieve if you were to make these pages more accessible.
And I guess we've got two interesting examples in terms of industries as well. You've got the travel industry. There's all the sort of travelers who have got all sorts of different needs and requirements. Every one of us had different preferences when we're searching for something, making sure that those are brought out and that people understand that there are options that they can have. And then in insurance, it's a basic need for us all to have insurance. Every single one of us needs to insure something at some point. And so it's not as if these are unusual niche products and niche services and customers that you don't recognize. It's simply that they're not able to access your service, so they're not going to give you their money. I guess that's the point, isn't it? You know,
Absolutely.
if you don't think of this, the same in finding you in SEO is that they're looking for words, they're looking for terms and phrases which appeal to them. Then I'm guessing that also has to be taken account of when you're crossing over in that area.
I don't know if there's any. Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
No, carry on, Kim.
I was just about to say, in just going back to your question, Mark, about whether or not there's ever been any sort of like conflicts between SEO and accessibility. I am a content writer, so I probably don't have that depth of expertise and knowledge in terms of like codes and kind of page build that others on the call might. But as a writer who has a lot of specialism in SEO, I've never actually seen any conflicts, whether or not it's like, you know, making sure your copy is completely readable, or you're optimizing H titles or title tags, even sort of looking at site maps and ensuring that your on-page navigation across every page is, you know, cohesive and consistent. Absolutely everything, you know, like that kind of SEO best practice and that kind of accessibility best practice seems to just be one and the same in my experience.
There's actually an example in the questions, which I'll ask you then, because I think this is quite a neat one somebody's come up with. We seem to have a tension in needing lots of internal links for SEO purposes, but these are making the text harder to reach. The digital team have added so many underlined in text links, that of course that in a screen reader, all you're hearing is repeat, just like a flurry of links is going to come at you. You can see that tension, can't you? Hey, you said it was really good to put internal links in for SEO. By the way, don't put too many on, because they've got to be announced every time and somebody's coming through on a screen reader. I guess that's the type of example, isn't it, where you're just trying to balance out which one of those levers you're pulling at which time. I don't know if anybody's got experience particularly. The question is there a difference between in-text internal links for SEO versus button links? And similarly, you know, how does that play out for accessibility? That's a to some extent.
I've been working a lot with internal links lately, in terms of, like, you know, cross-linking and stuff like that. And the main thing that we kind of advocated to kind of fix this problem is, one, make sure it's grouped so you can skip over it with a screen reader. Like, if you want to get to that content, it tells you what it is, and you're not interested, you can skip to the next. And two, make it relevant to the page types and the products that you're making. If you just have a bunch of links that just have no relevance to what you're doing, it's not going to make sense if you're in a screen reader, and it's not going to make sense if you're just a normal consumer. So make it make sense to your product. Like, all our cross-linking is linked in a way that is relevant to the product and could be helpful to consumer as well. So get the two in one, essentially.
I think we had a phrase I remember picking up when we first started talking about Google as a screen reader. I mean, it's a little bit more than that maybe, but it's essentially a screen reader. And I also think in you know, over time with SEO, Google is mainly trying to work out how you're trying to trick it. You know, so if you think stuffing loads of links in your page is going to win, it's probably not, because that's too simplistic. So then you do get that balancing act, don't you, between what's good for a customer, is the page readable, is it easy to use, screen reader being the primary way that Google's seeing it. I think that's an important lesson for not trying to catch it out, not trying to work your way around the parent rules. Is just make a good quality content with relevant links, and it will probably score the way that you're expecting. We were talking about those conflicts, and in terms of the budgets and so on, I'm also wondering whether, you know, there was a 5% figure somebody had in there. I don't know where that came from. I don't know whether that's validated in any way. But, you know, we do obviously know that SEO may be seen as being more of a commercially oriented answer. And so probably, you know, we'll get more airtime in terms of thinking about priorities when planning a project. Is that your experience, that you know, the people who the product managers, for example, are saying, well, look, if we can prioritize anything, it will be SEO over accessibility, or has that started to even out a bit now that you've crossed these lines? I don't know whether anybody has any experience of that, you know, improving the picture of accessibility costs and investments, and seeing them as equivalent to SEO.
So this perhaps doesn't necessarily directly address that, but I think there's a growing acceptance that accessibility is just a core part of good UX. And I think, you know, maybe historically, if you talk about we need to optimize for accessibility, there is a temptation by business leaders to say, what actual value does that have? But if you are saying to them, this is great UX and this is good for everybody, then I think they're much more likely to buy into it. And I think the one example that I've kind of heard before is when you talk about, like, people who have temporary disabilities and the impact you can have for them. So, for example, you know, I'm sure Nathan would agree with this, but for AXA Health, you know, it might be somebody who's coming to your site who's got a broken arm, and it's, you know, how usable is the site for somebody who is just having to scroll on the phone with just one finger, for example. And I think that's probably the best argument you can make as to why accessibility is important and how you should embed it within projects from the outset.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that any great SEO recognizes these days that, you know, I mean, anyone who's paying attention to particular Google updates understands that it's highly likely in the future that accessibility will end up being a real factor that Google takes into account in its algorithms. I mean, they already measure accessibility on Google Lighthouse. They already measure a lot of other UX metrics. So yeah, there's probably going to be a lot of kind of attention from the SEO community in coming years on accessibility.
I guess you want to get, so I'm on the accessibility side of this discussion. I guess you want to get to the point where the SEO want to come in and ask you how to do it. Is that happened yet? The SEO teams come in and say, hey, I've heard that accessibility is important, can you just, whereas Nathan, you're saying you've got to, you know, you've got to train them. Are they coming to you with requests yet? Is that proactive? I spotted this is important, I want to sort out my SEO. Is that happening?
Sadly, not yet for us, but we hope it will in the future. Absolutely, as people become more aware of it. A lot of colleagues aren't aware of it when I'm doing my training with them. So, we just think in the future they'll get to hear about it more, and then it'll come more naturally, and they'll come to us directly, as you said.
Yeah.
It's a funny one. We're still having to be very proactive as well, and really push the envelope with accessibility and make sure that we're almost like listened to, and that we get product owners and squad leads of engineers to actually put aside the time to implement accessibility into some of our like legacy landing pages. However, I'm almost, in a way, I'm hoping that we don't reach the stage where there's suddenly a panic and SEOs are coming to us saying, we're gonna have to retrofit accessibility in a huge way, and we've only got 6 months until a Google update comes into effect. Like, that would be a nightmare. So yeah, I hope that we can get more of the SEO community to sort of pay attention before it gets to that point, and there's suddenly some sort of update that means we've got to do everything very, very quickly. That way.
And we have got to a stage of the company where we are proactively thinking about accessibility now. So it's not something that's an afterthought anymore, which it was around 3-4 years ago. We've changed our culture, and diversity, equity, inclusion is a big point in our company now, and it's built into our competencies, it's built into our frameworks. So as part of that, we think about accessibility, and we actively are trying to change our landing pages that are legacy. So we include that. So we have product bugs that we actually put in, and we consider accessibility a product bug. So we have to go and fix that. So rather than just something that an accessibility champion or someone who's really passionate about does it, we say, oh, this is an actual bug we get from users or something like that. And we tend 25% of our time dealing with those problems as engineers. So we go back, and that's not just accessibility, but it's other stuff, but that's factored in there. And that's why we're actively improving those landing pages. And then in the new content that we have coming in, people are consulted. Like, I've been pulled into meetings by Kim quite a few times to have a look at designs and stuff like that as an accessible user myself. And we try and get like training from people like Addy, who works for AbilityNet as well, to help us use screen readers. And then we also have empathy labs, which allow us to spread out that knowledge about accessibility, because we can never get 100% of all accessibility needs covered. But an empathy lab, we can simulate what it's like to maybe have those disabilities, so people can start thinking in that way of like, well, what is the problem and how can we fix it? Not just for screen readers, but for all kinds of accessibility content. So yeah, we kind of move in that kind of good way. So
Just for anyone who might not necessarily be familiar with what an empathy lab is, it's this brilliant sort of almost like a workshop, like an in-person workshop that Griff, Heather, and a couple of the other peeps over at Skyscanner and the Champs Network set up in each of the main offices, where there's workstations set up that would simulate specific types of disabilities. So there's everything from goggles that simulate certain visual impairments, to slings so that you've got your writing hand strapped up and you can't use it. And there'll be laptops and mobile phones set up so that and then there'll be a task that you have to sort of try and do on the Skyscanner app or website and complete it. And it can sometimes be a huge struggle. And it helps people, empathize with those people who do use things like screen readers or need keyboard assist. And we had the CEO come and have a go at it all, and it's gained so much traction that way.
That's interesting. Nathan or Jack, do you know whether that sort of approach is active in AXA? Because we hear a lot about those sorts of, you're sort of winning hearts and minds rather than actually making the change, aren't you? So people have got a bit more empathy, they've got a bit more clarity about what's in it for them. Jack, you talked about using a screen reader. I don't know whether, the step before that is, why would I do that? Do you have those sorts of programs? Is that part of bringing these two communities together?
It's quite interesting. We've had the idea of these empathy, sort of similar to the empathy labs. It probably comes as no surprise that we've got a lot of spare office space now, as more people are working from home, and we thought it'd be quite fun to set up a little dark room somewhere and get people to try and experience what our screen reader users are actually experiencing. But yeah, I think going forward, we just want to encourage engineers to just at least be thoughtful about the kinds of challenges and the kind of pain points that people with disabilities have. And that's why we try and run a couple of workshops each year with yourselves at AbilityNet, where we invite people from across the business that we know are involved in the delivery of content design and building digital experiences, and effectively just try and give them a basic understanding of why it's important. And we try and give them awareness of the kind of resources that are out there to help them. So, you know, there's some really fantastic accessible pattern libraries out there, and that can really help them, you know, kind of demystify what accessibility actually is all about on a practical level. And, you know, the ultimate aim of that is to try and make those people the accessibility advocates themselves. And then, you know, when new starters join the business, hopefully they'll pass that message on and, you know, spread the word.
First to emphasise, this wasn't set up as an advertisement for AbilityNet's empathy labs, but genuinely it really works, and there are certain degrees to which some people feel uncomfortable with some of that stuff. It's worth mentioning that, you know, that having a you know, wearing a pair of glasses that simulates a particular disability is literally no substitute for the person's experience. But on the other hand, you find people who are dealing with that sensitivity and making sure that this isn't meant to be a substitute for actually listening to disabled people. That's often a contentious point about those labs. The other thing I was going to ask about, you mentioned the champions, Kim, and I think the stuff that you're doing in Skyscanner is exemplary, and a lot of stuff that we see. I mean, obviously we know what Heather's working on, and she's been involved in various sessions we've run. Could you just describe from your perspective how that champions network has evolved and how it then plays into this sort of coming together and cultural change?
Yeah, I can try and list a few of them in things. So basically, we're all split out into different pods. So for example, I'm in the makers pod. I think there's like engineering pods. Griff, keep me honest here and jump in at any time. So we're in these really focused groups, and in those groups we can all learn together. We have Slack channels set up to share tips, insight, and of course ask really important questions about day-to-day stuff. And then we have regular meetups, work shares, and talks and training. Another thing that we also do, we've just started doing recently, which we find really helps, is kind of setting personal goals. So every single advocate within the network, and there's like dozens, will set goals. I think it's just each quarter, or it might be each half. Things like implementing accessibility on a specific project that we might be working on at the time, or even just getting up and presenting the benefits of accessibility and getting buy-in from a particular group of stakeholders for an upcoming project, things like that. And these goals actually feed into our overall like development reviews that we have with our line managers, which means that everybody's really incentivized to do it. I mean, not that we need to be, but it's great the business recognizes that this is something that should be measured and incentivized. But yeah, like we also kind of recognize that just because accessibility is kind of embedded in every aspect of our culture and every particular kind of project that everybody's working on, it doesn't mean that our product's there yet. We've still got so far to go, and we're all like really trying still. Then yeah, we've already talked about the empathy labs.
Would you say they had a particular sort of effect on the take up of that? Obviously, having it in your review, your management review, is going to have a particular impact because somebody's pointing out to you that you've got an empty box where there should be a tick, for example. But the empathy labs is more of the hearts and minds stuff when it works well, I think. Is that something you think of as being sort of a moment you remember the first time you saw it working, or other things? I think in Skyscanner, the reason I ask is I think that there was that question at one point about why are we doing this, and I think that showing people what the actual output of this would be was a turning point in some way. I don't know whether you saw that.
I'll quickly like chime in with that. Like the empathy labs, the idea is like we don't want to create pity. We don't want someone to pity someone going through it. We want to create compassion. We want to make someone involved with the process and move through to actually resolve that problem that someone might have and make them a consumer. So it's not about, we're not trying to create an atmosphere where we're like, people understand what it's like. They can understand how to fix the problems that they may have. And because we can't get live users for every accessibility needs, it's a good alternative way to do that. And like ingraining that as part of the culture that we do to kind of, it needs to be reinforced by other things that are happening. So it's not just like we have the empathy labs and that's it. We also have the Champions Network to allow us to embed that culture in other parts. And culture is part of our review. So if you're showing that you're good and part of the culture, you're more likely to get a good review. So that kind of feeds into that. And so it's a holistic, different amounts of things. And MP4 Lab is just one tool that we use for that. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I'm wondering whether what I was wondering was whether SEO has an equivalent. How do we know what SEO's problems are? I was wondering if there's a missing bit here. I mean, Nathan, you know, your day is taken up trying to hit these goals, which are very explicit and very probably commercially oriented and very metric driven. And the challenges of doing that are obviously in the SEO world, they're probably well documented. Maybe part of the challenge is being inside that conversation from an accessibility point of view. Maybe it is a little bit one way. That's a question. I wonder whether that's a missing link here for us to be a bit clearer about what SEO's challenges are day to day. I've got an example here is on one of the questions says, well, there's two. Matthew, I hope we've answered your question about the empathy labs as well, Matthew. But I've read research that using click here as a call to action has more engagement than an accessible alternative. So that's like SEO saying, right, I want engagement. I'm going to right click here because I've read some research that tells me click here gets more clicks. And then, of course, the challenge is that the accessibility team is saying, oh, hang on a minute, that's not really going to work for us. So that's been driven by the SEO concerns, quite naturally. And then the other one, I really like this one because I see this a lot, is we have conflicts with writing headlines in a news office. The writers want to write clever lines and do not always include the keywords that help with SEO. That's a real SEO bugbear, isn't it? That's not and the accessibility is going to gain from that, but that must be part of your day-to-day reality, I guess. So what are the pain points for SEO that you see more routinely, so that we get a sense of where your priorities lie on the SEO side?
Sure. I just find kind of product owners in their different areas, they're not really keyed into SEO, and they don't really understand about the importance of keywords. So they'll just introduce into their copy and in their headings and their titles what they think the page should be about, without kind of thinking about SEO at all and thinking about what our users are searching for. They'll just think it from their perspective as a product owner. So I find that a real challenge, trying to introduce them to say, look, you really need to consider SEO here and what our users are searching for, not what you think will be coming up when you're writing the copy itself. So that's one of my biggest challenges.
Yeah, I think just to chime in there as well, I've come across a couple of examples in the last few years where, you know, that really comes to light. Having calls to action that sound really fun and bring out loads of quirky brand personality might be super engaging, but it's not great for Google's crawlers, and it's definitely not great from someone that perhaps has autism and won't be able to understand where that link's going to take you. And that it's not just CTAs or headlines, it's like all running copy and text on a page. I remember once working with a stakeholder who really wanted us to move away from our brand being associated with just really cheap flights, and instead we wanted to be known for, like, you know, a breadth of different ways of, you know, like different value, like just all around value. And they actually wanted us to remove any mention of cheap from all of our top of funnel pages, home pages, etc., which obviously would have proved quite disastrous for SEO, since it's one of our biggest keywords and people actually search for cheap flights more than anything else. So I think what this kind of highlights is like how, like, the synergy between, like, you know, what copy should look like and read like for SEO and how it should read for accessibility it's one and the same. Like, it needs to be findable. People need to be able to understand it. It needs to be simple to follow, and it needs to be written in their language, not always necessarily the brands. And that's like the foundation of good writing for accessibility and good writing for SEO. I mean, we've had situations before where keywords have been swapped out for nicer sounding synonyms, and we're like, no, this keyword's more important. We need to get this back in, guys. Things like that.
Yeah.
Can I offer one way that we've tried to optimize our CTAs? So on mobile devices, sometimes having things like find out more works a lot better because it's a lot shorter, and, you know, it means your button is more succinct. So one way we've kind of got around that is we just add a simple, basically a span with a class called visually hidden, and it just moves the text off screen,
right.
but it means it is still there, and it does mean we are able to give that a little bit more context to somebody who is a screen reader user, or potentially a crawler will understand it, because the crawler is inspecting the code primarily, and so that's one way we've kind of dealt with that challenge. But the click here one, we try and avoid that at all costs, because it's simply not true that people click. There's a lot of people who are using button presses, or they're using some kind of voice activated command, and hence it's not a click. It's factually inaccurate.
Yeah. Great. Well, look, as suggested by all of us, we've run out of time. There's loads to talk about here. What I've deliberately left out, just so that you know, just in the audience and also you guys, there's some questions here about headings and is this, that, and what's the best way to do that. I think that quite a lot of what we skipped over at the beginning, we will be sharing that anyway, top tips and information about setting up headings and the best practice use of headings, which is a really obvious crossover between the two areas, where it's really just about trying to get that best practice embedded into the structure of the page, and then using H1 and H2 and H3 as a hierarchical approach. All of those things. Questions asked about that along the way, and also some other sort of more detailed questions which will be shared with the panel, and we'll come back to those for part of the FAQ. I think what we've done really is talk about the challenges of working across two teams, really, and two distinct parts of most organizations, where we're thinking about the marketing and the use of Google as our sort of shop front, which is why SEO is so important. It's the one place we know that most of our customers are going to find us at some point. And then on the other hand, there's accessibility and all the considerations which can feel incredibly arcane and difficult to the SEO writers, and trying to bring those two together. Griff, you talked a lot about culture, and I think that the product of that work is that the culture shifts. But of course, the reality is that takes time. You have to have those connections made. You have those conversations, Nathan offering the training, so Jack using some of those tools, and people seeing those tools in use and then beginning to see that penny drop. They're all part of that mix. But I think we certainly see that SEO is so different to accessibility that it's a very interesting route into the conversation, where it's seen as being so changeable, and you're chasing after something that's driven by what Google wants. What's great is that what Google wants is what an accessibility advocate probably wants as well. That there is a strong correlation there, and I think that's the key lesson, is more and more, as you said, speculating about what happens next with Google, more and more that accessibility ranking is important in the weighting, and therefore has a payoff in SEO. I think that's a key thing to look at as you move forward. So thank you so much for your input, Kim, Jack, Nathan, and Griff. I think that's great. We're going to come back round afterwards and ask you to fill in some of these questions that are popping up here. I don't know whether you've been keeping track on them. We'll be pinging those out to you, and then I'm sharing them back round as FAQs. There was a question about training. We have got training, a couple of different things that we thought were relevant. We do training all the time. We've got embedding accessibility at every stage of your project. That's next week. And accessibility for copywriters. You can find out about our courses at abilitynet.org.uk/training. And you'll see here, there's a discount code AbilityNet webinar 10, which gets you a 10% discount on our training courses. Next slide, thank you. The other thing that I'm working on right now, AbilityNet TechShare Pro. It's a conference, our annual conference. Its lead sponsor this year is Google. Other sponsors are Microsoft, HSBC, Barclays, Intuit, and lots of others. It's in November, middle of November, the 15th, 16th, 17th of November. It's online, and you can get tickets now at techsharepro.com. The early bird tickets are available this week. We're putting a program out next week, so you begin to see the program, and the ticket price will increase slightly. Interestingly, there's a Champions Network price as well, so you can buy a bundle and then distribute that code internally as many times as you like, because that's actually where that change comes from. Exactly as you said, Kim, that network of people engaging in this stuff. They may not turn up to an accessibility conference, but there may be a session they see that's really interesting, and therefore you can drop a ticket in and say, why don't you come and see this one? That's all part of that shift, I think. So, and we're really excited about TechShare Pro. So please, if you haven't looked at anything yet, take a look at techsharepro.com this week, and then next week we'll be revealing the the program, and hopefully a load of things that are interesting in that, including a further discussion about SEO as it happens. So thanks everybody for joining us. If you have found it interesting and useful, the recording will be available afterwards, as will all of the transcripts and so on. If you aren't signed up to our newsletter yet, you can do that at abilitynet.org.uk/sign-up, or newsletter as it says here. Both work. And then we've got plenty of webinars. If you haven't been on one before, there's always something new coming through in our webinar stuff. Next one up is we're going to hear next week from Netflix about their approach to accessibility, which is always interesting to hear how those big companies are sort of building accessibility into their solutions. And finally, we talked about the empathy and thinking about the needs of disabled people. Put them at the center of your design processes. Think about users and all users. And one of the things you can do, come on one of our courses called Don't Disable Me, which is really bringing to life the reality of day-to-day life for disabled people at work and in education, and helping you, just a little bit of an insight for those of you that haven't sort of thought about this before, just to see some of the challenges that you're creating when you're making web pages and you're not making them accessible. Really just trying to show the challenges that are made through our decisions as digital producers. Cool. So thanks everyone. Wonderful to have you here, and we'll look forward to the FAQs and further round of information being shared out, and look forward to catching up with all of you again soon. Take care.